Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. You've been invited to present to a potential client. Fantastic! But if you think you'll win them over with a heap of PowerPoint slides, think again. Your sales pitch needs to be clear and connect emotionally through strategic storytelling. David Fish, a globally recognised strategist and business leader, has worked with some of the world's largest advertisers and pitched to world-leading brands. David's written a book on his expertise, What It Takes to Create Winning Presentations. And Chris Ashmore asks David, where do most presentations go wrong? David says, often from the very start.
That's where most presentations go wrong, is they start with what the presenter wants to share and not what the audience wants or needs to hear. The second piece that comes into that is then an over-reliance on presentation skills. We've invested so much in making great showmen, I call them, people who look fantastic on stage, but we're not spending enough time and paying enough attention to the structure of the content. So when we need an audience we need them to be more than just inspired and entertained, then the presentation's got to do three jobs. It's got to help the presenter deliver that story. It's got to help the audience follow along and stay connected. And then the audience has got to be able to easily find and recall the information, essentially become that presenter after seeing that content just once. And when that's the case, we need more than just those presentation skills, and we need content that really connects with the audience. And that, for me, is where so many decks start in the wrong place and miss the mark.
Your book, that's all about great presentations, and you argue in it that they should be clear, concise, compelling and simple. Can you walk us through each one?
Sure can. So clear is that start point. Getting clear means you know who matters to you. That is the audience that you want to connect your content to, that you want to influence, or you want someone in that audience who's going to take your content and do something with it. That's who matters to you. Then within that, we need to understand what matters to them. What change do we see as being possible? What problem do they have that we can solve? And how do we take them on a journey to a better place? And that anchors the presentation. It helps guide what goes in and what gets left out. And when we're not clear, it's super easy for that presentation to become really bloated with too much content. We start putting something in for everybody. We make points that are quite generic. And that's often when we get quite boring. So getting clear anchors the presentation and gives it a real purpose.
Well, the next one is concise.
It's very rare for me to come across people who don't have more content than they need. Most people are flowing with information that they could share to any audience that they're asked to speak to. So we need to organize that content, and we need to organize it around this journey of change. And the big piece here is we need to control the flow of information. We need to start with a concept and the most important point, and then ladder down into the detail. When we establish an idea and expand how that comes to life, we can actually increase the recall and understanding by as much as 40%. But what often happens is we start in the detail. We have this sort of idea that we present little bits of information, and then through some magic, powerful conclusion, we join it all together at the end. But often the audience is lost and confused before we ever get to that point. So we need to take control of the organization of the content so that we don't get lost in the content, and so the audience doesn't get lost in the content. And when content is concisely organized, every single presentation can be brought to life on a single page. And that, for me, is a bit of a test. If you can get your presentation summarized onto a page, you've got your content well organized. And if you can't, there's still more work to do.
Then there's compelling. What's this about?
So this is about storytelling. This is about using a 3-stage story arc that ensures the audience connects with your content as early as possible, because that increases their intention and engagement to what you're saying. So we want to establish right up front, why does this matter to the audience? What's at stake for them? And that brings this sort of relevance and emotion from the audience into our presentation. They feel part of our story now. Then we navigate through how that content helps them move forward before conclusively resolving that we've arrived at a better place. And I make that point, conclusively resolving. We never want to end on a thank you slide or a next step slide. That's like going to the movie and then some terms and conditions pop up before the final 10 minutes of the film, and you've got to go through the terms and conditions, and then you find out the ending. We never want to end a presentation without conclusively resolving that we've taken the audience on a journey and we've taken them to a better place. Within that, we're then looking at slide structure. So how does each side flow within the broader narrative? How do we signal what points are really important on those slides so that each point connects, that we're telling a story within the slides? And then we want to check our balance. We've got a narrative now that flows across this whole presentation. We want to make sure that there's balance between being about us and all the great things we do and giving the audience a reason to care, the benefits that are in it for them, and not just having a list of buzzwords and industry phrases. We want to join those two things together and just make sure there's balance.
You know, Mazars have been a long-time supporter of SoundCartel, and now they're helping us bring you this podcast. To find out how Mazars can support your business, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
That would be probably the hardest part of a presentation, to be able to tell a story. How do you suggest people tell a good story?
It's a great question. So the most important part of the story, if you've got that structure of establish the story, navigate through the core of the content and resolve, that navigation through the core of the content requires a narrative. And the best narratives are written away from a set of slides. Slides are, in fact, quite evil. They will draw you into things like the picture, where to put the heading in relation to the picture. Do I use white text on a black background? All of those things, the template, start becoming the primary focus when actually what matters is the story. And so if you take yourself away from a set of slides and actually write in a Word document on a piece of paper, sometimes I'll do it on Post-it notes, write the story as a narrative, a storyboard. Essentially, if you were storyboarding a movie, you would go scene 1, basic premise, scene 2, basic premise, scene 3, basic premise. That's how we want to think about a presentation. If I've got 6 sections to my presentation, what is the story from section 1 to section 6? How do they flow and connect? Then I can turn that into slides. Unfortunately, we're guilty. I think the stat is 78% of presenters will tell you that they grab slides from existing presentations when they make a new presentation. It's a reality. It's a terrible habit. And it makes that story really hard to get right. It's like grabbing scenes from 5 different movies and then hoping that the audience doesn't question why Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck appeared at the same time. It doesn't make sense and the audience gets lost because we've grabbed scenes from different movies. And so we want to think about our story away from the things that are going to distract us, which in the case of presentations are slides.
The fourth element for a good presentation is keep it simple.
It's my favorite. It's the one you have to do last because it's the hardest to do. And if you haven't done the work to get clear and concise with a compelling story, then it's difficult to become simple. But simple is when you can take a helicopter view of the plot, the plan to navigate through that story, and then the potential within that story for your audience. So if you come up and look at your content, the plot is the story of change that you want to describe within the overall narrative that you've got. The plan is how you're going to navigate through that. And the potential is the highest level benefit for somebody sitting through and being taken through this content. And when you literally can get that down on a page, it empowers you to be ready for anything. If someone stops you in the corridor and says, "Hey, Chris, why should I see this presentation that you've put in for Friday?" You can immediately go, "Well, it's about this. We're going to cover this. And the reason you should see it is this." It's an incredibly powerful tool to have. Someone says, "Oh, we've only got 20 minutes. Can you cut your presentation down?" You know exactly where to cut within your content because you know the key points that you want to land. So this helicopter view is the last part of looking over all of your content and then bringing it together in that plot, the plan and the potential and getting that down onto one page.
We've covered a lot, David, but I suppose being a great presenter is bringing all those elements together. It doesn't happen overnight, so lots of practice.
Absolutely right. And the book's based on tools, and I talk about tools for a couple of reasons. One, to avoid process, because process is harder to learn than grabbing a tool that you need at a certain time. But absolutely, the more you practice with a set of tools, the better you become. If you look at a great craftsman, they've put hours of practice in. So as you become practiced, you also become quicker. One of the things that a lot of the barriers that I hear and objections around working on presentation structure is time. But the more you use a tool, the quicker you get it applying it. So I can look at a 60 or 90 slide presentation and within 10 minutes, I can find 30 plus things that I can change to make that a more compelling presentation because I've done it so much. So yes, initially it takes a little bit of time to start to apply things differently, but the more you do it, the more you practice, the more you seek feedback. And in today's world, the more you watch yourself present, watch videos back of you actually delivering content, the better you'll become.
That was David Fish, author of What It Takes to Create Winning Presentations. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.